All right, we're going to continue then as we talk about the U.S. elections. We are now joined via Zoom by Brooks Spector, Associate Editor for Daily Maverick, to unpack the latest on the U.S. elections. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you so very much for availing yourself to SABC News as always.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
I was listening to a pundit on one of the American news networks saying something I found particularly interesting, and I'd really like you to help me analyze this, if it's even true, in fact. He says something like people are actually voting against Trump, not necessarily voting for Joe Biden. And I wonder if that's been your analysis of what's going on here. I mean, I tend to think that Joe Biden is a sort of a popular guy. I mean, during the time that he was vice president, no doubt he gained a lot of popularity during that time. But I thought that perspective was quite interesting, and I wonder if you can weigh in on it for us.
Sure. I mean, part of the answer is that very few people vote solely because of one thing. So that somebody may well feel on some issues that they like candidate A versus candidate B. In other contexts, they may like candidate B because of the quality of their personality or their temperament, or in yet other contexts, they may simply decide that candidate B is the lesser of two evils. And there are even those people who simply say, it's a plague on both your houses, I'm going to stay home. Joe Biden, I think it's fair to say, generated in his campaign that he could stay rigorously on message. And that message had several layers. The first of it was, the president, the current president, has been ineffectual at best and perhaps even criminal at worst in dealing with the COVID epidemic and the resulting economic troubles. By contrast, I am going to follow the science. I'm going to follow the medical evidence. We're going to deal with it as a coherent national policy rather than the very chaotic business that we see now. But the second level to his campaign, and one that I think appealed to a great many people rather than simply against the current president, was to his ability to demonstrate a real sense of warmth and empathy. Now, it's hard to fake warmth. I mean, you can, if you're a trained actor, you know how to do a bit of it, but Joe Biden's personality, touching every once in a while on the fact that he'd lived through a fair degree of family suffering, death of his first wife and a child, death of a son, that he had come from working class roots in a pretty hard scrabble city, and I've been to Scranton, so I know what I'm saying, and that he could understand and he could speak to the average person, the normal person, the person who wanted reassurance that their president was in their corner. And so those two very different layers were, I think, a significant amount of his appeal and even to some degree of his charm. And now you saw that in the nominating convention. There were all kinds of people who spoke warmly about him and about his wife and about his family life and about his empathy quotient. So to say that people were voting against Donald Trump rather than for Joe Biden is, and I've heard this from others, I think it's a vast oversimplification of what was happening, because it's as if everybody sits down with a legal pad and draws up quality A, quality B, personality, policy, but then they finally sum it all up. Do I like the cut of his clothes? Do I feel comfortable with the set of his personality and his temperament? And that Joe Biden did well in states that have not been Democratic for decades, and that was not an automatic thing, and it wasn't necessarily referring to their dislike of Donald Trump. The African American community in particular came out in force on behalf of Joe Biden. And it seems to have, although we don't have final numbers yet, as you know, it seems to have turned the corner in Georgia, deep southern state, and just maybe in Pennsylvania as well. And, like everybody else, I'll be back in front of the TV screens and the computer look very soon. So your question's a good one, but I think I think the person who said that is missing the complexity of the way voters think about things.
What are you expecting when it comes to the key states that you mentioned there? We're talking about Pennsylvania, we're talking about Georgia. It had been said that there's no turning back for Trump should he lose a key state like Georgia, and that he's completely out of the race. He seems to not be understanding that, or perhaps even, if I can put it differently, he seems to be undermining the democratic process. And in fact, saying that, votes are being found for Joe Biden. Any merit in any of what we've been calling bizarre sort of things that Trump has been saying this week?
Well, I don't think it's wrong to say the things that he said in those two public moments. I don't think it's wrong to call them bizarre. I think they were. And further to the point, the question of finding ballots is really it's a slander on the way elections and voting take place. Mm. Look, part of the problem in Pennsylvania is a very simple, almost mechanical one. The state legislature, led by Republicans, passed a law which said that in-person votes would be counted first. Now, because of the pandemic, and because of the encouragement to people to vote in advance or to vote by mail, a huge number of ballots were cast by mail in Pennsylvania. Yeah. Now, by law, of course, they had to be counted after all of the other election day votes had been counted. Mm-hmm. So, of course, they have been found. They've been waiting to be counted. And there are so many checks and balances in the system that it's not impossible, but it's really very hard to just hide hundreds of thousands of ballots and somehow wheel them out at the opportune moment. There are too many people watching. There are the people in your video insert right now. Those are not political appointees. Those are standard order civil servants, state-level civil servants, and they're doing what they're paid to do, which is to open every mail ballot carefully, open the outside envelope, take out the anonymous envelope, take out the ballot from that, unfold it as you watch that woman that person doing it right now, and doing it so that they can then be tabulated by the automatic voting machines, or in some cases, in some states, still by hand. If Donald Trump and some of his people wish to believe that there is all kinds of chicanery and shenanigans taking place, he's welcome to believe it. But until he has proof, or until his attorneys have proof, it's only so much words. And judges will throw these suits out of court, as they have in some cases, because there's no evidence of mispractice or malpractice. Undoubtedly, there will be some ballots that are missed. There will be a few ballots along the way that were miscounted or mishandled. That's inevitable because it's a human process and human beings are responsible. But the percentage of it will be ridiculously low, and too many people will have checked, counter-checked, and rechecked this. People are staying 24 hours at their desks to do this job, to get it done. Now, the real problem to me is somebody who's been working for 24 hours is getting a little tired and maybe is doing something that they weren't paying attention to. So that's where you have to have all the checks. But the Trump insinuations in those last two public events, you'll notice that there's been no Republican Party politician who is not his sons, but politician, somebody elected to office. None of them have stood up and said, by golly, my president is right. This is what's happened and it's terrible. They've all backed away a little bit. So to give him space, but not give him much support on this question.
All right. Mr. Spector, I mean, I keep hearing everybody saying that, this is a neck and neck election and, this is really close and all of that. But if I look at the fact that Biden at the moment is at 253, Trump at 214, 270, of course, to win. Is that necessarily close? It does seem as though, I wouldn't say it's a landslide for Biden, but certainly it's quite a big margin. And in fact, some news networks even calling it at 264 for Biden at the moment. Can we really say that this is neck and neck?
No, it's not neck and neck in a couple of ways. If you look at the popular vote totals in aggregate, I don't know whether you have those numbers, but Joe Biden has about 3 million more popular votes than does the president. That's hardly neck and neck. It's sort of neck and toe, I guess, maybe. But in each, the way the system works, of course, as I'm sure you've had explained numerous times by now, you win electoral votes by winning a state's popular vote. So if you win California, which is a huge state, has 55 electoral votes, you win that state, you get all 55 of its electoral votes, which Joe Biden did. If, on the other hand, if you're Donald Trump and you win Florida, you get all 29 of its votes. And as those piles begin to mount up, and as the race toward 270 occurs, that's the finish line. After that, it's all just more applause. And so 6 votes, let's say for the sake of argument, that most recent number that you mentioned, 264 in Joe Biden's side, that's 6 electoral votes shy of an absolute majority.
Yeah.
And if one of the networks were to call the election in Nevada for Joe Biden, it would be over. If one of the networks were to call the election for Joe Biden in Georgia or Pennsylvania, it's over, and Donald Trump cannot recover from any of those 3 eventualities. And so neck and neck, I think, is neck and neck comes out of the idea that we spend an awful lot of time talking about horse race politics. The 2 horses are neck and neck down to the finish line.
Yeah.
But in reality, what we're seeing is more and more people, more and more votes have been counted, and they are heaping up on Joe Biden's side of the ledger. And eventually, almost certainly, unless something extraordinary happens, we will cross the finish line with Joe Biden having accumulated 270 of the electoral votes, and the rest of it is simply analysis. Even if the Republicans and Donald Trump's campaign go to court in every one of those swing states for any number of different reasons. I'll just add a little funny footnote. In one state, they're demanding by appeals to a judge that they stop the counting where Joe Biden may be leading, and in another state, they are demanding that every vote be counted where Donald Trump is still behind. So you can't have it both ways, I don't think. But this is what happens when you get right to the wall and you realize that this is just about the end of it. And the movie bans are going to have to show up to the White House soon enough and take away his personal belongings. So neck and neck, it's great television, but we're moving away from the horse race.
All right. And if we're going to continue with the horse analogy, I guess one could say that, if we look at Trump's behavior in recent days, it really is the last kicks of a dying horse, isn't it?
Well, I'm not going to call him a dying horse just yet, but I would think of an untamed stallion who's had a little bit too much of the Jimson weed that's growing wild on the prairies.
Thank you very much for giving us your time. We're going to leave it there, unfortunately. Would have loved to carry on, but certainly always a terrific pleasure speaking to you, Brooks Spector. Thank you for giving us your analysis here on SABC News. We certainly do appreciate it, sir.
Take care.